Welcome back. In this section, we will learn about how to get the data from our backend API and display the to-do items in our front-end app. So currently, this is our app. Inside our app, we have a layout, and inside the layout, we have header, a footer, and a to-do app component. Inside the to-do app, we have these helper methods to add to-do item and remove to-do item. And this to-do list contains the actual to-do items. So currently it is displaying the to-do items from the props. So to display the to-do items, to get the to-do items from the API and show as a list, we need to get the data from an API using the function that we have created earlier. So we have created a function inside our API handler. So inside our API handler here, you can see that we have created get to do items function. So we need to import this get to do items from dot slash API handler. Okay, so now we have get this get to do items. So we need to call this get to do items. So so we will fetch data inside use effect hook. Use effect. This will be a function that is executed. It takes two arguments. The first is the function that is executed, and the second is list of parameters. So we can provide the values here. So whenever any of the value of the provided variable changes, this function will be called again. Use effect will be triggered again. So why are we using use effect to fetch the data? So if we go and search for React use effect, this is a React hook and it is used to perform the side effect functions. Here you can see that. And it is used for data fetching, setting up subscription. So we need to fetch data. So that's why we'll use effect hook. Inside use effect hook, we'll have this function. So to get the data, let's just first create a function called get data. And our get data function will be responsible for getting the data from this API handler. So we need to call this get to do. This will be an async function as we need to await for this get to do items. Await get to do items. This will return us the data. Okay, so once we have the data, we would like to display the data inside the list. So instead of iterating over the props.todo items, we'll iterate over this data and we'll add those items as a task. So inside the use effect, we want to call this function get data. So whenever this get data functions is called, it will get the data and will have this data inside this data variable. So this data might be initially an empty array. So let's just change it to state. So whenever we set state, the component is re-rendered and our data is updated. So whenever we have the new data, that is displayed in a form of a list. So I'll say const data set data is equals to use state. Initially, it will be an empty array. And once we get the data, we need to call set data and provide it with the data variable. So let's just change this variable to something else. Let's just rename it to temp data. And once we have the temp data, we need to set it. Okay, so inside the use effect function, we are triggering this function. This will get the data, and as soon as we have the data inside temp data, it will call set data, and we'll have the data inside this. So instead of iterating over this props.todo items, we need to iterate over data array. And you can see that if I remove this thing, you'll see what happens. So let's just close this, and inside this is our application. So here you can see that we are getting the data from the backend API. If we go to JSON server slash to-dos route, we'll get this data ID 1, item 1, item 2, item 3, and item 4. and two of the items are completed and two are pending. So if we reload our application, it has four items with two completed and two pending. So we remove the second argument and we are not able to see the effect of removing this item. So let's just bring up the terminal and add a console dot inside this get data function. So whenever console dot log get data called. So if we bring up the terminal, we will see a log get data called whenever this get data function. So if we bring up the terminal, we'll see the log get data called whenever this function get data gets called. So let's bring up the terminal. This is the terminal for the JSON server. Let's just go to this. This is the terminal where our application is running. So I've hit save, and here we are not able to see the effect of this get data being called because do we need to save it? Okay, obviously we'll see the logs here. I was looking for the logs at the wrong place. So if we go to the console, here we can see that get data is being called continuously. If I clear the console, the request is continuously being sent and get data is being called. And that is why if you open the terminal where our JSON server is running, we are seeing that we are getting requests to get to do items. This is happening because whenever get data function gets called, it changes the state. It sets the state, and as a result, the component is re-rendered. And once the component is re-rendered, the use effect is triggered again, and the same cycles, the same cycle goes on. So that's why we added the second argument. Second argument is to provide the list of variables that we want to look for, and if there is a change in any of these variables, only then use effect will be triggered. So we have provided an empty array. In this case, this use effect will be triggered only once. So if we now open the terminal, you can see that these are all the previous logs, and this function is not being called again and again. And similarly, if we go and inspect, find the console for our app, we can see that this function is not being called again and again. So now we are getting the data from our backend API. Next, we will learn about how to post data to our backend API.